Hello, everyone. Good. So I'm Mateus, and I'm here today to talk a bit about what's coming for React or what's been here already, etc. And I'm a frontender here at STRV. And this one's going to be the Lightning version of everything. So, I mean, there's so much more things to be talked about this whole topic. Anyway, so I have a couple goals for today, and I'd like to start my goals by showing you this quote. And actually, it's a tweet by Guillermo Roche, who's nowadays CTO at site, and this tweet is from back 2014. And he said that React is such a good idea that we would probably spend the rest of the decade exploring its implications and applications. And on top of that, I have first, I want to show you a few thoughts on DOM, scheduling, and control flow of your code. And second, show you 3 theories I have regarding the future of both the web platform and React.js itself. But no spoilers for these 3 theories for now. So, Don, who here has ever heard of React Fire? Whoa. Thank you, guys. So basically, it consists of an effort by the React core team to modernize how React DOM behaves. And it's focusing on making the whole DOM part of React more aligned with how the browser works. And it also aims to make React smaller and faster. The original estimations they had is that once the whole React Fire thing would be done, React DOM will be like a third of its bundle size it is right now. And it also brings a bunch of small changes, which include, for example, attaching events at the React hood instead of the document. They were having issues, for example, embedding React applications in existing code bases, so this improves this. Also, they wanted to migrate onChange to onInput, because if you get to think about it, the original event in the browser is onInput and not onChange. onChange is a React thing. And they would get rid of class name and go for classes. And there's React Flare, amongst a bunch of other changes. So React Flare, basically it is everything inside React Fire that is related to the event system itself, and they also called it React Events. They were building like a library called React Events. And who came up with this idea was Nicholas Gallagher. He is the creator of React Native Web, so it kind of makes sense that he is willing this cross-platform consistency thing. So it is everything that is events under React Fire. And the main goal was to make it easy to build UIs that felt great on both desktop and mobile. So they were trying to get rid of synthetic events, but have events that would behave the same with mouse events and touch events and taps and etc. And it also aimed to bring some declarative APIs for doing events. So for example, you would have hooks for handling events and etc. But and unlike the current event system of React, it wouldn't inflate your bundle, so it would bring only what is necessary. For example, the current event system that you have in React is pretty much the same since React was born back in 2013. So there's a bunch of polyfills and things that are very likely not necessary anymore because browsers have grown and APIs have grown, etc. So it should allow to cut down the amount of code that you have in the library itself. But like a little more than a month ago, back in the mid-December or something like this, the React core team itself just decided to pause work on that. And what happened is that they figured out that they were trying to bring a too high-level abstraction. And as they were removing parts of the event system, I mean, they spent the whole last year working on this. The initial GitHub issues from January, and this one I just mentioned is from December. So as they were removing part of the code, they figured out that it was not unnecessary, 100% necessary. So part of this code was preventing bugs and etc. And they were also removing code that would end up being added on application side. And so this was the issue where they stated that they paused the whole thing. But I would highlight this part instead, that they are coming for some more exploration on modernizing React Dawn and the event system itself in the future. And they had made very, very good progress back then. Second thing, scheduling. So before talking about the React scheduler itself, I'd like to provide you a brief overview of scheduling. I mean, we have a few problems when building UIs, no matter if you are using React, Angular, or Vue. Because users, they do expect immediate feedback. And all sorts of events can happen at any time, and we as developers can't 100% look into the future to handle those events. And when it comes to the browser, the resource that everything is fighting over is CPU time, because there is where UIs are updated and JavaScript code is handled, and etc. But if you have a way of splitting our tasks, our expensive tasks, into smaller chunks of tasks, we could then use some sort of mechanism to organize and orchestrate those tasks in a way that it wouldn't block the main thread, and then it wouldn't mess with the user experience. So that's what schedulers in general do. They provide a scalable solution to performance by letting us coordinate CPU and network-bound updates, which lets us to improve perceived performance, and allows us to handle different priorities of work by giving them like low, idle, or high priorities. And the thing about schedulers is that they are not a React.js thing. They are more like a thing that solve UI problems in general, but React. So who here has heard of the React scheduler package? You watched this talk before. So, first, concurrent React. Concurrent React is a thing that was first announced back in JSConf Iceland, when Dan Abramov gave a very, very good keynote, and he showed both time slicing and suspension, etc. It is something that allows the whole rendering work of React to be paused and resumed at a certain period of time. And this also allows you to have smaller tasks when rendering. And concurrent React doesn't come on its own. It brings also the scheduler. And basically, it's a way to the package itself is a way to schedule work in the browser, but it's an unstable thing, and the APIs are changing frequently. And if you are interested in understanding the concurrent React thing itself and how it coordinates with Fiber and etc., this is the talk, but I won't be focusing on this for this one. So in React, we have 5 different priorities for works, for units of work or for fibers. And these go from immediate to idle. And the first one is like, do it now. I mean, now. And the second one is like, you're supposed to do it now, but you have like a 250 milliseconds timeout. And then you have normal and idle, where you have 5 and 10 seconds timeouts. And you have idle, where you don't have a timeout, and this task is only be run whenever the browser is idle. So, and the difference between the first two is that the first one is really sync. And then you have the scheduler as a package, and which is the unstable thing, and you can find it inside the React monorepo. And I think that the most important thing about scheduler you can see with an example. We have this web app, which basically fetches data from all the STRV staff, and you can search by their name. And as it searches, it tries to highlight the name of the person. But on the event handler, the onChange event, I added a bunch of expensive computations. And then you can see that even the FPS counter has stopped working, and the whole main thread itself stopped working, and I can't even type anymore. So, and then it comes back, and then I can type, but you see that from time to time the main thread stopped working, and then the user doesn't have more response. And then I changed this flag, setting it to true. And let's see the difference. Now I have concurrent and schedule. And I can start typing, and you can see that it will highlight almost as I type, but not instantly. And if I try to type a bunch of things, you won't have the main thread locked. So it's a huge improvement in terms of perceived performance for the user. And in terms of code, what I changed is, first, I enabled the concurrent mode by using this unstable concurrent mode. Not only this, but inside the event handler, I took advantage of this unstable next, which allows us to queue a task with a lower priority than it would have if it was a regular event handler. And also, I have this part of code which is send deferred ping or send ping. And basically here I am mocking an API call where I would be, for example, sending data to some analytics platform, because for some reason it could be important to have data as the user types. So I have these different functions, and send ping basically would send this data, but send deferred ping uses schedule callback plus low priority to schedule this function call, allowing it to have this 10 seconds priority thing, because it's not important to send this data immediately. Rather, you can focus on making your UI responsive for the user in this case. So we went from this scenario where all the event handlers are tagged with this red mark, which indicates a performance problem, to well-split tasks where all the components render okay, you don't have event handlers locking the components rendering thing, and the analytics thing is only sent after everything is rendered. So that's really improvements on perceived performance. And doing a little recap, basically we saw that concurrent React allowed us to break long-running tasks into smaller chunks, and the scheduler allows us to prioritize what is really important for the user. And when it comes to the web, basically, we have a few concerns, because everyone should be using the same scheduler. For example, if we had Angular using one scheduler and React using another scheduler and Framework X using another one, plus the browser with its internal using another scheduler, those would be fighting each other. So it is important that we have a web API for that. And actually, we do have a few scheduling primitives. Would anyone mention an example of this? Yes, set timeout. And you also have request animation frame or request idle callback and post messages. But those are not enough, and those are not 100% reliable. For example, there's a post by Facebook Engineering where they explain, for example, why you can't trust 100% on request idle callback across all the browsers. So we do need scheduling primitives for doing proper scheduling. And there is some work been doing on that. You have the main thread scheduling API, which you can find here. And basically, this API has been developed in cooperation with React, Polymer, Ember, and other framework communities, plus the web standards community, obviously. And it's pretty much aligned with the work that the React core team has been doing. And it will be directly integrated into the event loop. And there's this post by Facebook Engineering where they explain how this whole collaboration thing has been going, and how this API will behave. And if I were to highlight any part of this API, it would be, for example, is input pending. And what is input pending does for you is that it allows you to check whether there's some input by the user going on, so that, for example, you can skip a expensive computation that is running and only come back for it after the user has stopped doing some inputs. As you can see here, navigator.scheduling is input pending, and you have some even more complex options, for example, checking what kind of event is going on. You can, for example, detect if it's a mouse down, mouse up, key down, key up, or etc. So, and then you can stop doing work if you see there's any event of this going on. And the recap on scheduling is that it's necessary for building a responsive user interface. And right now we can do a lot at framework level with both concurrent React, and we'll be do with the scheduler once it's okay. And a web standards proposal is on the making that will bring a universal scheduler. Last topic, control flow. So, raise your hands thing. Who here has ever heard of effective handlers? Good. So, for those who haven't, there's this post by Daniel Bromov where he explains algebraic effects for the rest of us, and it's a pretty good one. By the way, it's good that it's simple, and it's also bad that it's simple, but... And in this post, he provides one example of effective handlers where he has this function, getName, and he tried to simulate what would be a fictional JavaScript with effective handlers, where instead of a try-catch block for handling this new scenario, you would have a try-handle block. And instead of throwing, you have this perform thing. And instead of catching, you would have a handler for effects. And then you have the most beautiful part with it, which is this resume with, because it lets you jump back where the effect was performed. So it's a very good way of handling stuff. And actually, there's a proposal by a friend of mine that we've been working on. That is a proposal for TC39 to bring effective handlers into JavaScript. And this proposal is kind of built on top of the Dan Abramov post, by the way. But what does that have to do with React? Since like 2014 or something like this, you had Sebastian Markbach trying to bring effective handlers to JavaScript because being a member of the React core team, he missed those things. And I think that you see more effective handlers in React when you get to see the source of any suspense-compatible API. For example, React Cache. Who here has ever stopped to check how suspense works under the hood? Yeah, 4 guys. What did you think of it? So, I mean, you basically have this reaction because you see that they throw promises. They don't throw errors, they throw promises. And you are like, what the fuck, why are they throwing promises? And then basically, I mean, a component is able to suspend the whole thing because whenever they got a promise and they handled it and etc. But basically, nowadays I see that doing this was the only way they had to mark this throw, handle, resume pattern that they would have if JavaScript had effective handlers in the language level. And a few conclusions on top of all of this is that this is the last time the raise your hands thing. Who here has ever built a native app, either iOS or Android? Ooh, good. So, for those who raise your hands, who here heard of either Component Kit or Litho for Android? Whoa. So basically, they are forced from both Android and iOS communities on building declarative UIs, on bringing way of building declarative UIs. And those are not new, but last year, Apple shipped Swift UI, which is basically a way of doing declarative UIs on iOS. And yes, they didn't have an official way of doing that till last year. And this was the thing, one of the things in the iOS communities last year. And this takes me to my first conclusion. I think that React has been pushing other ecosystems to the future, and we can see this on Swift UIs and other declarative UIs are forced we have in other platforms. Second, I think that React has been pushing web APIs to the future as well, because we can see those in, for example, in the scheduler API that has been developed in collaboration with them, and the effective handlers discussions that they have been pushing like for years. And last but not least, they have been pushed by the web APIs as well. So the efforts they spent the whole last year making on both React Flyer and React Flare and trying to make its event system closer to what is in the browser and in the formal web API shows this. And I think that Guillermo Roche was actually right when he stated this back 4 years ago or something like this. And I wonder if in the next, the next meetup, in the next year, I don't know, instead of doing this, we could have a talk like the future is React. And before you leave, I have one more thing to say. Actually, there's one picture, but they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, so. This is me giving a talk about Ionic in an iOS developers meetup like 4 years ago and telling them that that Angular would be the future. And there are so many things that could go wrong, like Ionic on an iOS developers meetup saying that Angular would be the future. So don't you ever trust my future prediction, guys. And regarding this talk, I am Matheus Albuquerque. You can find me everywhere as Y the Combinator. And the slides will be available under my speaker deck profile. Thank you for making it to now. And as we would say in Brazil, forte abraço. Thank you.